Hi, welcome back with Dr. Norel Edwards, talking about books I've recently read. So, up next for me to talk about, I'm sort of like backlogged and talking about books I've read. I've also just, winter break, holidays, start of the new year, the chaos of 2025. So, I read Entitlement by Rumaan Alam. I haven't read anything by him, but I did watch the Netflix adaptation of Leave the World and generally like that. Not sure if I'll go back and read the book, maybe, maybe not. I will say that one of the things that struck me immediately about this book was like the crispness of the writing. I feel like I opened the first page and read it and was just like, yes. Like just immediately yes. The writing is immediately yes. It starts off talking about this prickler in New York City, or talking about just like the misery of like the New York City subway. So I think in another video I talk about how like college campuses is like an immediate yes for me. I think any book set in New York City is also just like an immediate yes for me. I mean, New York City is a popular place to choose to set anything, certainly TVs and movies and also books. But yeah, a novel set in New York City is pretty much almost always, especially with the person of color, especially Black, like I'm like, oh, I can't wait to see, because, I grew up in the New York City metro area. And so I'm just kind of fascinated with how it, lines up or not with the kind of New York I remember, the New York City. I go back here and there, whatever. The New York of my college years, whatever. So let me just give you the first line. It was a strange, sultry summer, the summer of the subway pricker. But Brooke Orr had decided not to let that interfere with the business of life in New York. I don't know. Something about that just really grabbed me, right? She and everyone in the city carried on, ignoring the debilitating heat and the lunatic at large who was jabbing unsuspecting commuters with a hypodermic. The Post had dubbed this man, well, it must have been a man, in parentheses, the strap hanger sicko. And so, again, I think especially in this time where we're seeing a lot of news about the craziness on the New York City subway these days, I think that immediately, and I'm thankful not to be on myself, but anyway, that immediately kind of spoke to me. It's also, I think, set in like 2014, which immediately spoke to me because I was like from 2009 to 2012 sort of living in Manhattan. And so, yeah, I like was like, oh, this is like really close to that era that I was in Manhattan a lot, in New York City a lot, taking the subway a lot. And so I was like, okay, this is really sort of like intriguing and drawing me in. And then it further really drew me in because essentially this book is about a young Black woman who's kind of like at the start of her career. She had a job as a high school teacher that didn't pan out for a couple of years. And then she goes to work for this sort of like hedge fund guy who started a nonprofit, like a foundation. And he's definitely giving away, oh my God, the name is escaping me. He is definitely giving George Soros, but in the book, the guy's name is Asher Jaffe, and he's like someone who made a bunch of money doing, all kinds of things, hedge funds and markets, and then bought some stuff and bought real estate and blah, 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 blah. And now he's trying to like make a foundation, and he's just got all of this money. And, for a while there at the start of my kind of like post-college career, I was in a PhD program, but I was also working a lot in nonprofits. And honestly, when I've been in college, I really thought I was just gonna like eventually become the executive director. Even from the end of high school through college, I was certain I was just gonna like lead a nonprofit. I don't know why. And so I had internships at nonprofits in college. I continued to work in the nonprofit sector for a very long time alongside getting my doctorate. And so interesting enough, I worked for a nonprofit, the Drug Policy Alliance, as like an administrative assistant, but did some cool policy stuff. And they lobby Congress on the war on drugs, and actually very much a part of the reason that their New York office helped legalize marijuana. Shout out to them. And so I got to see so much of, just like policy and nonprofit stuff working there 20 hours a week for like 3.5 years in DC. And they also, I think, like many nonprofits, receive funding from George Soros. And, I sort of started to understand more about the Soros Foundation and kind of like, you know, how they impact so many things, as well as sort of like international, just, you know, there are a couple of huge nonprofit foundations like Ford, which is mentioned in here, Mellon, you know, Soros, that are kind of like Mellon, if I didn't say that already, just funding everything. And so there's some talk about sort of like the industrial nonprofit complex. And this book immediately kind of like made me think about that like, you know, sometimes it feels like the whims of some of these organizations too can also come down to, you know, a lot of specific whims of one man or the board or whatever. Again, not to say I know anything about what's going on in any of those foundations at all, or any or the nonprofit I mentioned that I worked for years ago. I stopped working for them in 2020. But again, I just feel like for my brief, actually, in fact, I had a job offer to work for the International Drug Policy Alliance. That's not right. The International Drug Policy Office in the Soros Foundation. I ended up turning down that offer. But again, I would have been, you know, a programmatic something. And so again, just like very familiar with that world. And so I'm always drawn to books that kind of like, and I've had a lot of jobs. So maybe that's also why I'm drawn to a lot of things. But again, really, really interesting. And so the main character, Brooke, you know, becomes a close assistant to Asher Jaffe. And so she is kind of tasked with finding a project to make her own. And then he continues to ask her, well, what do you want? And so it's really interesting. The book takes on this trajectory where it's increasingly cringy because she's starting to realize, being around this guy, that he's got all like, he's like, fuck me in my basic life, right? Like, this man's got a lot of money. And of course, like, he worked for it or whatever, but he's got just an unfathomable amount of money, right? And she's like, how do I carve out a little bit of something for myself? She also has two friends, and one of her friends is set up because of her dad's like retirement fund. And so she's just like increasingly like believing that, oh, I can just ask for what I want from life. Asher Jaffe says, what do you want? You know, like, what do you want? And she starts to think, oh, you know, I could be the kind of person who just says what I want and I get it. And so increasingly she kind of becomes unhinged throughout the book, thinking that she can just sort of like ask for what you want, or if you put it out, like almost like an over like reliance on manifestation, if you will. It's cringy. It's so cringy. But the further you go, I think it's fascinating. I think it's so interesting because, right, we're seeing more of this kind of like, and I mean, I wonder if, authors are often impacted, right, by their cultural moment they're writing in. I feel like now we're seeing so much of people being like, oh, I manifested that. You've got to say things out loud. You have to like say what you want, right? You've got to put things out into the universe, all that kind of stuff, right? And so you're seeing Brooke have this kind of mindset, but then it eventually is gonna, right, like hit a wall of reality. Like, okay, you can do that and do that and do that, but you know, is it gonna work out? Like, you know, like sometimes things aren't just gonna come together just because you say they will. So, I mean, very interesting. I mean, I feel like this was definitely, it felt like quite a literary work, if that makes sense. Like, I don't even know how to explain it, but I felt like this was a piece of art. I think in particular because of the way it asked this question about wanting, as well as about sort of like also about art. There's some moments where Brooke, I think she maybe has like an art history background from Vassar. So also she comes kind of from a fairly, you know, her mother lives in Manhattan. She's got like a white adopted mom or whatever. So she comes from a bit of money herself, but nothing compared to, right, like what Asher Jaffe is showing her, that there's this world out there. And she's like, oh, can I come claim a piece of this pie, right? This sort of like this more than American dream, really, but this, and I mean, thinking about sort of like what you see on social media now, the ways that we're thinking about, or the ways that people are feeling desireful of a certain level of wealth, feeling like, okay, you need, you know, hundreds of thousands to be comfortable, right? We all want to live in luxury, or there's more, I think, because you see so much of it, you have so much exposure. So I think there's also a conversation to be had about how like exposure to these sort of like this, you know, a certain quality of life makes you feel like, oh, I want that too. And why don't I deserve that, right? Like I too should be able to have that. So Brooke also has an art history background, and I don't know, they look at some paintings that I really don't know because I don't know nothing about art. And, you know, she kind of explains to Asher about the art or whatever, and what, you know, Monet or Matisse or whatever is trying to say, or how to understand it. And again, it's just very, very, I hate to say interesting, but interesting to me. Have you read Entitlement? Did you like it? Tell me what you thought. I think that's it. We had 10 minutes.